Politically, Australia is a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy, comprising 6 states and 10 territories. Australia's population of nearly 26 million is highly urbanised and heavily concentrated on the eastern seaboard. Canberra is the nation's capital, while its most populous city and financial centre is Sydney. The term megadiverse country refers to any one of a group of nations that harbor the majority of Earth's species and high numbers of endemic species. Conservation International identified 17 megadiverse countries in 1998. Many of them are located in, or partially in, tropical or subtropical regions. The rock art of Aboriginal Australians is the longest continuously practiced artistic tradition in the world. Most Oceanian countries are multi-party representative parliamentary democracies, with tourism being a large source of income for the Pacific Islands nations. Australia's demography has been shaped by centuries of immigration. Immigrants account for 30% of the country's population, and almost half of Australians have at least one parent born overseas. Australia's abundant natural resources and well-developed international trade relations are crucial to the country's economy. Megadiversity means exhibiting great biodiversity. The main criterion for megadiverse countries is endemism at the level of species, genera, and families. A megadiverse country must have at least 5,000 species of endemic plants and must border marine ecosystems. The broadest definition of Oceania encompasses the many islands between mainland Asia and the Americas. The island nation of Australia is the only piece of land in the area which is large enough to be considered a continent. The culture of the people who lived on these islands was often distinct from that of Asia and pre-Columbian America, hence a lack of association with either. On the 1st of January 1901, Federation of the Colonies was achieved after a decade of planning, constitutional conventions and referendums, resulting in the establishment of the Commonwealth of Australia as a nation and the entering into force of the Australian Constitution. In 2002, Mexico formed a separate organization focusing on like-minded megadiverse countries, consisting of countries rich in biological diversity and associated traditional knowledge. This organization includes all but 3 megadiverse countries as identified by Conservation International. The islands mainly lie on the continental shelf of Asia, and their inhabitants had more exposure to mainland Asian culture as a result of this closer proximity. The island of Taiwan similarly lies on the continental shelf of Asia, with their inhabitants historically having had exchange with mainland Asia. The Federal Capital Territory was formed in 1911 as the location for the future federal capital of Canberra. Melbourne was the temporary seat of government from 1901 to 1927 while Canberra was being constructed. The Northern Territory was transferred from the control of the South Australian government to the Federal Parliament in 1911. At the same time, they agreed to meet periodically, at the ministerial and expert levels, and decided that upon the conclusion of each annual ministerial meeting, The next rotating host country would take on the role of secretary of the group, to ensure its continuity, the further development of cooperation among these countries, and to reach the various agreements and objectives. Biodiversity or biological diversity is the variety and variability of life on Earth. Biodiversity is a measure of variation at the genetic species and ecosystem level. Biodiversity is not distributed evenly on Earth. It is usually greater in the tropics as a result of the warm climate and high primary productivity in the region near the equator. Like with these historically uninhabited areas have also had diverging developments since European discovery, and they are still intertwined to the region not just through their geographical location or geology, but through past and present indigenous populations as well. Australia's size gives it a wide variety of landscapes, with tropical rainforests in the northeast, mountain ranges in the southeast, southwest and east, and desert in the center. The desert or semi-arid land commonly known as the outback makes up by far the largest portion of land. Marine biodiversity is usually higher along coasts in the western Pacific, where sea surface temperature is highest. Biodiversity generally tends to cluster in hotspots, and has been increasing through time, but will be likely to slow in the future as a primary result of deforestation. It encompasses the evolutionary, ecological, and cultural processes that sustain life. Indigenous Australians are the original inhabitants of the Australian continent and nearby islands who migrated from Africa to Asia around 70,000 years ago and arrived in Australia around 50,000 years ago. They are believed to be among the earliest human migrations out of Africa. Lying on the Indo-Australian Plate, the mainland of Australia is the lowest and most primordial landmass on Earth with a relatively stable geological history. The landmass includes virtually all known rock types and from all geological time periods spanning over 3.8 billion years of the Earth's history. These programs were created and supported by the federal government and delivered by provincial governments at various technical colleges and regional universities as well as industrial centers. They were meant to deal with the lack of technical specialists in Argentina at a time of rapid industrialization expansion across the country. The period since the emergence of humans has displayed an ongoing biodiversity reduction and an accompanying loss of genetic diversity. Named the Holocene extinction, and often referred to as the sixth mass extinction, the reduction is caused primarily by human impacts, particularly habitat destruction. Micronesia began to be settled several millennia ago, although there are competing theories about the origin and arrival of the first settlers. There are numerous difficulties with conducting archaeological excavations in the islands, due to their size, settlement patterns and storm damage. As a result, much evidence is based on linguistic analysis. The Australian mainland and Tasmania are situated in the middle of the tectonic plate and have no active volcanoes, but due to passing over the East Australia hotspot, Recent volcanism has occurred during the Holocene, in the newer volcanics province of Western Victoria and southeastern South Australia. Forest biological diversity is a broad term that refers to all life forms found within forested areas and the ecological roles they perform. As such, forest biological diversity encompasses not just trees, but the multitude of plants, animals and microorganisms that inhabit forest areas and their associated genetic diversity. To the southwest of the region, in the Australian landmass, the climate is mostly desert or semi-arid, with the southern coastal corners having a temperate climate, such as oceanic and humid subtropical climate in the east coast and Mediterranean climate in the west. The northern parts of the country have a tropical climate. Water restrictions are frequently in place in many regions and cities of Australia in response to chronic shortages due to urban population increases and localized drought. Throughout much of the continent, major flooding regularly follows extended periods of drought, flushing out inland river systems, overflowing dams and inundating large inland flood plains. Forest biological diversity can be considered at different levels, including ecosystem, landscape, species, population, and genetic. Complex interactions can occur within and between these levels. In biologically diverse forests, this complexity allows organisms to adapt to continually changing environmental conditions and to maintain ecosystem functions.